Okay, well, kind of welcome to the Nearly show, or whatever it's called at the moment. It's a bit of a risk. I'm just putting this camera on and I'm going to talk to you about the fact that I'm in the middle of 6 months treatment for chemotherapy after an operation to remove cancer from my bowel. Oh, yucky stuff. Great big wound I got down my tummy still. Stoma bag in position, which is something I knew nothing about, but it's manageable. And I can see my wife's about to get home, so I might have to stop doing this for soon. But I just thought I'd talk a bit about how it felt, because the day after chemo infusion, which I have every 3 weeks, and I go into pills for 2 weeks and have a week off. And today, I'm realizing that the actual infusion is not an unpleasant, day in a nice part of the hospital, but it hurts in my arm. My arm tingles a lot, and the next day I have loads of very strong, strange, quirky symptoms, fizzy fingers and champagne toes I've been talking about. But I'm also on steroids, which makes me slightly kind of high and creative and weird. So I'm sort of hobbling around the house, falling asleep for a bit, then thinking, then wanting to write or make music or whatever. And there's not much to say now, because then there's a sort of dip when the steroids wear off, which I'm now better prepared for, where you suddenly can look at the dark side of it. But today I dared to read the book about cancer and symptoms and look at all the little numbers and letters next to my particular case, and I'm on this borderline. It hadn't spread. There's no sign of spread beyond the lymph glands around the wound when they did various scans before I started chemo, but it was a big fist-sized thing, as I've said, and I'm sort of in this kind of borderline state. It's still possible that this chemo might wipe away all the cancer, but who knows. So that's just putting that on the record. Okay. They open up my belly, take out a fist of pain, scrape me out and staple me back together again, scan me for impurities, attach me to a plastic drip, infusing all my innards. I'm floating like a ship. So let's say a little bit more. It's a daunting process, all of this big operation, and then the chemo, which, the word is, it gets kind of worse as it goes on, although some things I get used to, others get harder. One thing that happened, so my daughter came up at the weekend with her lovely son, 2-year-old Yuli, and we had a fantastic time just before lockdown. I was kind of worrying a bit about safety beforehand, and actually for the first time in talking to her, I let out a kind of real cry of pain, of just thinking, why the fuck is this happening to me? And I just wanted it all to go away, and I didn't know how I could cope with it, and I was scared about what I was going through now, and about the possibility of not surviving for very long and all that kind of stuff, which up until now I've kind of found quite hard to access those feelings. And I've tended to be slightly in this category now of being people saying things like, oh, you're so good at this, which I don't like very much, because I don't feel good at anything inside. But on the other hand, the big thing for me is thinking, on the one hand, this is a process to just kind of go with in order to hopefully rid myself of the cancer and get back to normal. And on the other hand, this is my life, and even how I need to kind of feel I'm fully alive. Actually, one thing I want to mention is before I got the news about the cancer, before lockdown, we came back from our last road trip, and I wanted to buy this, which symbolised something about getting older, of thinking that just as you begin to feel slightly kind of othered by people, put into this new category of just an older person, and perhaps I wasn't preparing then, but the kind of restrictions that we all have now, but you're thinking, I'm going to get less and less capable as life goes on. But this symbolizes kind of all of me. This is my life, my history, my sexuality, my questioning, my wishes to travel and think and explore, all of that is there. And it's a nice quiet thing that it's not a badge, it's just a little symbol for me to look at, and I have been looking at it as I go through chemo. There's one male nurse at the Whittington who spotted it very quickly, and the last time I came showed me that he'd been looking at something equivalent. He later on spotted my novel, which I have with me, and he was really interested in it, so I gave him a copy. So that's an interesting connection. Meanwhile, another nurse yesterday told me that this was my last session for chemo, because it's normally done in 3 monthly bursts. So I had a few minutes of feeling completely like, wow, I'm free, but then worried about why. Before she looked at the details and said, oh no, sorry, you're not even halfway through yet. So there's a lot of kind of extreme things going on. And, this bit is curiously creative when I'm full of steroids and wobbles. Second week last time I found harder because I began to think I expected to feel better than I did. And the third week when I go off the drugs, again, I'm beginning to think of as the time when suddenly everything's great again. But actually that also can be when the anxieties and the feelings kind of return. But I've been doing a few things. One is a kind of improv dance class, which is finished now, with a woman called Rebecca Mackenzie and a group of us all over the world, Britain and a few abroad, moving about, thinking about how we experience the world around us and being given little scores for kind of moving within this very small space, which I found great, because actually it's, this small space is perfect for somebody who feels slightly self-conscious about themselves and has limited movements that can mentally explore. And I've also been working with a therapist, and originally I just thought it'd be great to have somebody I knew I could talk to about anything, and assumed that this would be the person I'd sort of sob and wail to. But actually I found it slightly the opposite. It was thinking, she uses art in her kind of practice. She's also a writer. And it was where I began to think, let's look at how to make this a creative process, to really kind of explore it. It's a kind of absorbing, interesting, if scary kind of terrain that I've moved into. And also a time to think not just about them as making art, like writing the novel, making art in order to take all your inner stuff and turn it into something that's out there and fiction and proper and not you. And then there's maybe a more personal experience of kind of going back into thinking, well, what does it mean for me? Not a kind of critical exploration of what I'm doing, but a kind of human therapeutic one. And that seemed quite exciting. And in fact, it led to me, if you don't mind me just getting a couple of things to show you. Yeah, I made, at the therapy session, I drew this picture. I think I've made this one before, which is a cutout, if you can see it, of this kind of stuff in my body that I'm going to have extricated. And then I did another version. I think I did this one first, actually, for her. And this picture of this sort of agony up here, but then the tumour itself, or the sort of shit inside me, actually, when I did it, it began to look rather kind of beautiful. It was scenic writing and colourful and pretty. And that was a real turnaround, real sort of therapeutic moment of thinking there might be beauty. I think I've always assumed that my tumour, it's a kind of accident, these things happen, but if it represents anything, it's all my kind of, I think I've always felt curiously at war with my body. I've never been into fitness. I smoked too much for a long time. I sort of binge eat, got a very sort of sugary diet. I do lots of things like that. I tend to feel, and have had sort of anxieties and feeling of a lot of sort of angst in there. But then beginning to think that there's all sorts of interesting things about that. And again, it's who I am, you know. I don't want to just spend the whole time regretting it. I want to explore. So that's the kind of stuff that I've been thinking about. I've been writing songs, and I'll probably tack one on the end of this. And then the other bit actually was this. I've been reading the Stoics. I'm going to read you a quote from the Stoics, which I found pretty useful. Yeah, maybe I should do that next. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What a tiny part of the boundless abyss of time has been allotted to each of us, and this is soon vanished in eternity. What a tiny part of the universal substance and the universal soul. How tiny in the whole earth the mere clod on which you creep. Reflecting all this, think nothing important other than active pursuit where your own nature leads, and passive acceptance of what universal nature brings. How does your directing mind employ itself? This is the whole issue. All else, of your own choice or not, is just corpse and smoke." I think that's pretty wise. And he's also very good, the Marcus Aurelius, on, no, it's the other one. Another one here, I've been writing these in sort of big print and pinning them to the walls. Another Stoic, Epictetus, said, "Sheep don't bring their owners grass to prove to them how much they've eaten. They digest it inwardly and outwardly bring forth milk and wool. So don't make a show of your philosophical learning to the uninitiated. Show them by your actions what you've absorbed." And this is good. "If your body was turned over to just anyone, you would doubtless take exception. Why aren't you ashamed then that you've made your mind vulnerable to anyone who happens to criticize you, so that it automatically becomes confused and upset?" So thinking a lot about, which he talks about in therapy, about wanting to make things creatively and get them out there, but the danger of that becoming this sort of needing to have a sort of self-justification, you know, that this makes me valid. So it's also sort of forgetting about who cares what other people think, really. It's about me and my relationship to the world, but also my relationship to the people very close around me, who, it's a different sort of issue, isn't it, about how you're seen by people very close. And I think when you begin to feel very mortal, you think, well, actually, there's another level. I have to know how I feel about me. That's a very personal, non-judgmental quite, but sort of honest, hopefully. You know, the kind of how you're going to feel about yourself at the very end. So lots to think about, which is kind of fascinating and hard as well. And then that gets muddled up with this sort of stuff like social media and putting things out there and getting feedback, and if it's good feedback or bad feedback, or how many people count, and how to sort of use this platform to just not be writing things in notebooks and hiding them away, but somehow putting them out there to be found by those that might get something from them. But in the process, not to begin to fall into the huge trap that the whole planet's in, maybe, of suddenly performing. Which maybe brings me back to this idea of humdrumming. I read a great book about humming, which just points out that humming is this strange singing with your mouth closed. So you're performing, but you're internal as well, somewhere in between. If I walk down the street humming, I know people can hear me, but it doesn't really worry me whether I've got the words of the song or the tunes right, because it's also a kind of personal meditation. And drumming on your body, for me, has a similar, connection. I've also got over here real congas. I play percussion, have done in bands, but it's also a sort of personal way. One of the ways that you just know you're alive, because you can touch yourself and make patterns on yourself. So humdrumming is the kind of overall word I'm using for this kind of exploration you know, me and the big C, or whatever you call it, chemo in lockdown. Oh, really, no, forget all that. Just me, you know, right now, me being alive. Me and sort of fictional me's as well, nearly me's, a chance to not feel I actually have to be writing about my reality. Fiction can be more real. But what didn't quite to me now somehow kind of represents all the sort of shit and grot. I think it's a funny book. I don't think it's kind of negative, but it's kind of a bit sad. And it's all about, you know, limitations and the failings and, you know, unacted desires, sort of that hovers around it. And what I want to write about now is also a much more utopian, idealistic thing about relationships based on my fantastic relationship with Hattie, who I've known all my life and have been through all sorts of things with the kids, who I'm very proud of. But that sounds like it's just a celebration of being lucky. But I mean, I wanted to write something which is about why we should feel hope and excitement, and why some of the stuff that my generation's explored and been through still really seems to matter. Not just historically, but it's also what makes it possible for us to live fully now. And I'm kind of proud of some stuff about us and our generation. And that's it. Thanks very much. They open up my belly, take out a fist of pain, scrape me out and staple me back together again. Scan me for impurities, attach me to a plastic drip, infusing all my innards. I'm floating like a ship on a medicated ocean, in a drug-induced tempest, to the island of my body, where I writhe and rest, and see no means to climb or claim this monolith of flesh. Everything is out of reach, this tiny room, this slightest breath. It's the endurances, the hope of clearances, the love of families, the wondering when the ending is, the tapping on the body bits, the singing through closed lips, humdrumming. Now I've got fizzy fingers, and I've got champagne toes. Metallic mouth, stinging nose. There's poison ink flushed through my veins, which just might make me well again. Out of the repair shop with a bag I have to place around the stoma, like a berry sticking out above my waist. I'm soft and dry orgasmic, with my insides moved outside. I wonder where my essence now resides. In the endurances, the hope of clearances, the love of families, the wondering when the ending is, the tapping on the body bits, the singing through closed lips.